In keeping with the Halloween theme, I decided to stay with the Sega Genesis for the next game. It's a smaller game simply known as Splatterhouse 2. The first game was released in the arcade. I never played it, but in my lifetime I managed to play the Japanese-only game, although I can't remember the name or how or why I encountered it. Nevertheless, never playing the second one, I decided to play that one for the review. You play as a dude named Rick, who dons a mask to look like Jason Voorhees. This mask supposedly gives Rick superhuman powers. Rick ventures to a mansion on a hill to save his cohort Jennifer, who supposedly died in the original game. The mask taunts Rick, saying that she doesn't have to die, so I guess this is motive enough for Rick to head out to the mansion and search for her. Truth be told, he's able to save her from complete death, but it's not that easy, as he has to jump down a hole into an area known as the Void to save her. The opening scene is actually pretty impressive. To add to the creepiness, you eventually see a small group of dead trees with corpses hanging from them. Awesome! You see stuff like this throughout the entire game. It does a very good job in keeping the atmosphere dark and eerie. The stages all consist of scary themes, and the graphics are detailed enough that the game truly feels disturbing. Although Rick himself isn't incredibly detailed, the monsters typically are. Perhaps the best part of the visuals is the deaths that occur to the monsters Rick is fighting. With Rick's power, most enemies will succumb to a single strike. In fact, one of the first things you'll probably notice is when you start the game is the graphic deaths the monsters have. Punch a creature, whatever it's supposed to be, and it gets split in half, gushing blood. Freaking sweet if you ask me. And then eventually you find a pipe. Using this, smash the enemies into the wall in a bloody mess, not unlike a bug hitting a windshield. In each stage is a different weapon that causes different animations to the monsters. In the second stage, for example, you can bash in the heads of these creatures with a bone. The game typically remains bloody, even for the boss battles. When the bosses die, they typically do so in a gory fashion, in keeping with the game's themes. It doesn't disappoint. The sounds also contribute to the whole scariness of the game. Monsters will shake and cry, your character will moan when hit, and the music stays with slow, dramatic tones. It all sets the tone perfectly. Perhaps one of the most frustrating things about the game are the controls. For the most part, they work well. There's only two buttons that are needed, one to attack and one to jump. The attack controls, for the most part, are pretty smooth. Rick can punch when standing, kick when crouching, and also kick when jumping. You can do a slide kick by jumping forward, holding down, and kicking, but the timing needs to be perfect for it to be performed. The problem is that Rick moves slowly, and the jumps are therefore affected. Many of the pits of the game are wide enough that you just barely make any jump correctly. The pits usually do 1 point of damage, and others drop you into a dungeon, where a ton of zombies are at work trying to kill you. At one point in the game, in the sewer, you're also required to hop over enemies, which is difficult because of the way the slime monsters react. When hit, they don't die. Instead, they fall into a pile of sludge and then reform back into their normal shape. If you're not quick enough, it's difficult to actually jump over them and not take damage by touching them. Maybe the game just needed to give you a bit of extra hype on your jump, but the jumping really needed some work. Another thing about the game that becomes an issue later on is the difficulty. There's 3 difficulty settings available, and I played the game on the easiest one, but it didn't feel like it in the final stages. You can take 4 hits before you die, and 20,000 points adds on an extra life. These deplete quickly though. The first stage isn't too hard, but the second one starts getting difficult, and it just gets worse from there. You need to time jumps and attacks perfectly. Unfortunately, the game starts becoming a memorization game. I started knowing exactly when and how the monsters attack because I had to play them constantly. This, however, was due to the infinite continues that you get. All of the monsters are pretty much set in how they act and attack, so once you memorize everything, the game gets slightly easier. This doesn't mean it's a cakewalk though. Some parts of the game feel like they're just simply impossible, but to me, that gave me more motivation on getting further, because I wanted to complete the game. I was able to, but sure as hell wasn't easy. Even though you start memorizing the patterns of the game, the bosses can still be frustrating. Because they can take a few hits, you need to make sure that you hit them more than they hit you. For example, this damn bug boss. As soon as he gets close to you, he does a sliding attack. You can attempt to jump over him and then kick him as soon as you hit the ground, but usually you're not going to be quick enough. It's easier to let him jump towards you in its little hops, and then punch him quickly. But after he dies, or you think he's dead, he respawns into a fast-moving spider that you need to defeat with the same amount of health you had left. It gets frustrating, but with patience you can destroy it. There's 8 stages to the game, with about 2 to 3 levels in each. There's a password system, which is great, but what makes it even better is by putting them in what seems to be 4 random sets of letters. Those letters aren't random. When you go into a password screen, you'll notice that you cycle through the sets for the password. It makes it super easy to input passwords. The stages themselves all fit together well. You don't notice any sort of randomness to them. Everything just seems logical. For example, one stage you're running away from a big creature on a dock. The next stage, you're in the forest leading up to the mansion. You fight a boss, and then find yourself in the hallway of the mansion. The only part of the game where the stage placement starts getting a bit odd is when you have to jump in a place known as the void to save Jennifer. However, when you think about it, even this makes sense, considering that she's supposed to be dead and you're trying to save her. You then use an elevator to get out, and then use the raft again to escape the mansion. Overall, Splatterhouse is a pretty solid, although frustrating, game. It fits the Halloween theme perfectly. If the jumping controls were better, I'd be willing to give it a better score, but because they are sort of flawed, I have to knock it down a notch. Final score? 8 out of 10. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.